Hey everyone, welcome to this new episode of Explicitly Pro-Life. I'm Kristan Hawkins, and with me today is my very good friend Camille Pauley. She's the co-founder and executive director of Healing the Culture. Now, many of you may not have heard of Healing the Culture, but you really need to know about Healing the Culture. Camille is based out in Washington State, north of Seattle, and what they're doing is incredible. We've worked with them at Students for Life to partner on high schools, but if you're a pro-life parent or grandparent, or if you're involved in a private Christian or Catholic school, you need to know about Healing Culture, because the curriculum that Camille has put out is, excellent for high school, middle school, and now even elementary school. Yeah. And we've trained even college students for life leaders in your curriculum using, and what's really cool about Healing Culture, you guys use like these 10 universal principles, which are philosophic principles, right? So you can kind of defend your pro-life beliefs using these very basic philosophic principles that everyone else knows and kind of gets. So before we go into that, and I want Camille to we're going to do some role play, maybe, and ask some hard questions, have Camille respond.
Okay.
But I want you to tell everybody what Healing the Culture is, how you were started, what you're doing, and how folks can get involved.
Sure. So we were started in 2003. I started it with Father Robert Spitzer, who is a Jesuit Catholic priest. He was the president of Gonzaga University for 11 years, which some people may know him by. He runs the Magis Center in California, but he also wrote a book called Healing the Culture, which is like a philosophical explication for why you should be pro-life in the first place. And it gets to the underpinnings of the pro-life movement, what it is we actually believe about freedom and happiness and rights and suffering and success and quality of life, and all of these terms that the pro-abortion and assisted suicide movements have really co-opted. So what he did was he wrote a book taking back all those words and giving people a philosophical language for how to talk to other people and move them in their hearts. And it was so good and so well received that we decided we needed a whole organization. So we created Healing the Culture. And what we do is we train people, we train college students, teachers, pastors, religious educators. We train students, parents, homeschooling parents, and pro-life advocates how to speak a different language when you're talking pro-life. The tendency is to stick to statistics and facts, which are really good, but they usually don't change people in their heart and in their core. And so we needed something in the pro-life movement that reaches people more in the core of who you are and what makes you tick and why are you living the way you are, and tries to get them to change how they're living their lives. So that then when you get to the topic of abortion, it almost becomes a no-brainer that abortion would obviously be unthinkable. So that's what we do. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I tried to read Father Spitzer's book one time, I'll admit. It is
it's deep.
dense.
It's heady. It's dense. Yeah.
So that's why I love what you're doing is you kind of break down Father Spitzer's book in more bite-sized.
Yeah, Father Spitzer for Dummies, kind of. That's what we do. Yeah.
I'm the dummy. Father Spitzer for Dummies, but they're bite-sized pieces. And I think the way you approach, the issue of abortion, and the responses that you train people on how to ask other people questions and kind of point out inconsistent principles that they're kind of holding.
Yes, and you're really trying to call people more towards who they really are. And so the idea is not to challenge them with a fact or challenge them with a statistic, but to challenge them with you don't really believe this. You're not really living this way. This isn't really your dream to be this way. And so you're kind of more trying to pull somebody out in their heart to say, this is unworthy of you, and let me show you why, and let me show you who you really are, and tell me if you agree with this, and let's dialogue on a deeper level. So anyway, the methodology we use is just one tool in a whole bunch of toolkits that a lot of different pro-life people have created, but it's a really important and really valuable one, and we have a lot of resources to help people if they're really interested after the podcast, they can get online and get a bunch of our resources to use.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that's so important because if you look at I don't know if you've read Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind.
No.
It's behind me somewhere.
Okay. I have to read that one.
He talks about how, the differences between the way political, progressives versus conservatives think. And it's very true about how we make arguments too, right? Political conservatives, when they tend to make arguments, they try to use facts and the very reasoned arguments. Look at the facts. The facts are right here. The moment of conception, unique co-living human life is formed. That is the fact. But that doesn't actually sway the other side. And so it becomes these very frustrating conversations and dialogues that happen because you have the facts and you can prove, and you can say, Google it, and go to Google, but they're still getting very angry. Because you really haven't moved their heart.
I like to tell the story. My husband tells a story when he's also a pro-life advocate. He works in politics and I work in education.
But funny story, Michael Pauley so Camille's husband is the co-founder of American Collegians for Life, ACL, which is the predecessor organization to Students for Life
of America. Right.
So it all probably
he's like Papa Bear. So, but when he tells the story, when he was in high school, he was a debater. We both were debaters, but he, in his debate class, he had to debate abortion with a young woman, and she was pro-abortion and he was pro-life. And they fought it out and argued. And at the end of the class, it was unanimous that he won the debate. He had the facts, he had the statistics, he had the better arguments. And at the end of the day, when all the students had left the class, the young woman he had debated against, who really was pro-choice, came up to him and he says that she was just livid and in a rage. And she just said to him, you can have all the facts and all the statistics and all the, the rational arguments you want. But at the end of the day, if I want an abortion, I can still get one and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. And it shook him to his core because he realized that's not what's going to win this debate. You may win a debate, because you're technically better and you have more facts, but you're not going to win the heart. And if you don't win people's hearts, you lose the battle. And so part of what we do has to be to engage people in the head and in the heart, and then help them make that connection. So that they say, this is not worthy of me. This is not what I want to do. And abortion is beneath my dignity and beneath the dignity of human beings. So anyway, so we have what we call these 10 principles. And Father Spitzer wrote this first book, Healing the Culture, the heady one. But then he wrote a second book called 10 Universal Principles of Civilization. And in that book, he lays it out in a different way, kind of easier to digest.
It is easier.
More systematic way. And that's the curriculum we use now. And we've grown a program called LAST, Life Advocacy Student Training, where we train college students how to argue and discuss in this methodology. And then we created a high school curriculum called Principles and Choices. And now we're creating a curriculum for K through 5 called Philo and Sophie, which is the name of these characters.
And there's like puppets. It's really
puppets,
cute.
It's like kind of Sesame Street style puppetry and animation and stuff like that. And then eventually we'll do a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade curriculum as well, so that there'll be a tool for every age, for secular and non-secular, for religious and non-religious audiences, for old and young. So.
And you're trying as an organization, and I want to get into these principles because I'm really excited about it.
Yeah.
But as an organization, you're trying to get this curriculum into the Christian, Catholic and non-Catholic Christian schools and private schools, right?
Right. The curriculum for high schools that we have is usable in really faith-based schools, Christian faith-based schools. And then we have the curriculum that we have for college students is non-faith-based. It could be religious or secular setting. And what we're doing for the K through 5 would also be a faith-based setting. It's just a lot easier to get it into a faith-based setting than to get it. It's very complicated and difficult, if not impossible, to get a pro-life curriculum in a public school. So
how many schools are Principles and Choices, a high school curriculum? How many schools do you think you're in right now?
Around the United States, we're in about 120 Christian high schools. There have been, over the last 5 years, there's been about 200,000 students who have gone through the curriculum, because a lot of our schools are repeat offenders.
Yeah.
But internationally is a lot more than that, because we have some of our resources are online.
Okay.
And so we're all over India, we're in the United Kingdom, we're in all over Canada. And so a lot of our video resources are used in schools that way.
That's terrific. And do you guys have, and I'm really into stats and metrics.
Yeah, okay.
My staff gets a little frustrated about that. But do you guys have statistics of what happens when you introduce a child to Principles and Choices?
We do. We do. We actually did a quantitative study of students before they go through our learning and after on the high school level. And this study was done in Christian schools. And before taking our curriculum, we would ask students, what is it that makes you happy? And prior to going through our program, about 50% of the kids in our Catholic and our Christian schools would say that what makes them happy is success, sex, getting drunk, being powerful, winning, competition, having a lot of money, making a lot of money. This was the idea of, very few of those people, even mentioned anything about relationships, but that was their primary. After going through our curriculum, and this was only a 2-week unit, that moved to 80% of the kids switched then to saying that what made them happy was God, faith, family. So you had about half of them saying that beforehand, and about 86% of them afterwards saying that it was really love was what made them happy, and family and relationships and making a difference to somebody beyond themselves. On the abortion issue, it's about 50-50 again. You have about 50%. It's, our Christian schools mirror the rest of the population. About 50% of them are pro-life. 50% are pro-choice, yeah. But after going through the curriculum, we have over 80% of them saying that they are pro-life.
After 2 weeks.
Yeah, after 2 weeks. Assisted suicide is a little harder. They see that as a different issue. We can shift from about 40% to about 62% pro-life. And the reason it's harder is because it's harder for them to see a victim. It takes a lot more time. Where's the victim here? You make your own choices. And it's not until they really start to see, you do become a victim when it becomes a duty. What you see as an option for somebody who's vulnerable and sick and at the end of their life, what you see as an option to them becomes a duty to die, to get out of the way. Yeah. And the pressure and the burden to die is really, for a lot of people, immense and even unbearable. So once they see that, then you start to see the transformation and the shifts. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about assisted suicide. We're going to do a second episode because I definitely want to talk to you about that because we haven't really covered that on the podcast. But so, that's phenomenal. Like that you actually have statistics to prove that you're not just like making like a pro-life brochure and saying, oh, we made 1 million copies and 1 million people read our brochure. No. You actually know how many students have gone through the curriculum, over 200,000, how many schools the curriculum's in, and you have quantifiable metrics to show that by going through the curriculum just in 2 weeks, you can have huge mind shifts.
Yeah, but 2 weeks is not enough because if you want to keep those kinds of shifts, you have to have that kind of education going on for the long term. And that's why we're creating a program now, kindergarten first, second, third, fourth, and then a high school curriculum and then a college curriculum because you have to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it so it becomes second nature for people.
And that's so important too, and why I love what you're doing. And I think we're having a partnership meeting tomorrow because by the time we often get students at Students for Life in college, a lot of times it's really late in the game. It's
very difficult.
We're like, they've already kind of set their mind to what path they're on.
Yes.
They've already started making those poor decisions.
Yes.
They're already wounded from a lot of those decisions. And
they're committed.
Yeah.
They have a lot of reason to be committed.
Yeah. They're sold out in those decisions. And so we're kind of at that last moment of crisis. We're trying to like intercept, try to stop that behavior. But really, if we can, we always say, if we can get to them earlier.
Yeah. We shouldn't be doing triage. We should be doing formation.
Exactly.
At the very root, at the very beginning.
And this is why what Planned Parenthood does is so, good. So just recently, Planned Parenthood was announced that they're going to be in 50 LA public high schools. They're setting up these mini Planned Parenthood clinics.
Yeah.
And
because they know you. It's all about formation.
Yeah, they have to build relationships, start young, start teaching their version of sex ed as soon as possible. And we, as a pro-life movement, we're like, okay, we're at the sidewalks in front of the abortion facility. We at the pregnancy center. We're on college campuses, but we're like not there where Planned Parenthood is building these relationships with them. And so we're getting them too late. So before we get into all the fun stuff, okay, so I just want to make sure we get through this because if I forget to have you plug it, then we're going to get, on something else. I'll be a bad host. So if parents want their kids to go through this curriculum or watch the videos, is there a way to do that if it's not in their schools?
They can go, we do have a website that we're building and there's a few pieces on it that people can see now to get an idea and some learning videos, but there's maybe about 6 or 7. So in another year or two, we'll have a lot more content, but you can go right now to respectlife.university.
Okay.
And on that channel, you'll get to see some of the videos on what we call the 4 levels of happiness, some of the application videos where you learn the principles through an application of an issue, like the Burning Fertility Clinic, for example. We did one on that.
IVF clinic.
Or we've done one on abortion statistics and how to handle that debate. We've done one on the argument that it's a baby if you want it to be and it's not if you don't. So that would be a good place to start. And then if people want to see samplers of more, our Principles and Choices website, which is I think principlesandchoices.com, will show the high school curriculum. There's a sample page where we've written an actual play called Robert and Emma that goes through the whole curriculum. And there's one of the acts of the play is up there that it's a whole unit you can actually use in your youth group. It's free. It's loaded up online for free.
Okay.
And it's just a great way to introduce the concepts to students between the ages of 13 and maybe 19.
And you can, if you're a parent, you can actually take that and go to your school and say,
Yeah,
here you go.
Use it. Yep.
Here's Christian worldview formation right here, right?
Yeah.
And they can contact you through Principles and Choices?
Through healingtheculture.com is our, but they can contact us through that one as well. But healingtheculture.com is our main website.
And you can contact me if you need Camille's email. Yeah. I'll give it to you. Maybe your cell phone, depending on who you are. So, I mean, because this is important because you as a parent, like I want my kids to go through this, but they're homeschooled, so I got to do that on my own. Right. But if your child is in a public, probably a private Christian school, you can get this curriculum through to the school.
If your child is in a Christian school or a Catholic or a non-denominational or a Protestant or evangelical Christian school, you can actually use the textbooks in the classrooms or the teacher guides in the classroom. If you're homeschooled, you can use the same program without the teacher resources. You wouldn't need the teacher resources. The student textbooks are all you need. If your student is in a public school, you can use all the online resources because they're shorter ways, little respectlife.university for the older kids, the high school, college kids. And then in a couple years when we have it developed, you can use the philoandsophie.org website for all those will all be free videos when it's done. We're just in the beta testing stage right now on that, but it's going to be cute.
Really cute.
Really cute.
I've seen the videos. It's really cute. I was at the banquet.
There's a mermaid.
Yes, there's a mermaid.
And a fuzzy monster. You have to have a monster when you're doing kid stuff.
So that's really important. So if you're involved in a Christian school, you should really connect with Camille to get this curriculum into your school. This is what we need every Christian school in America to be teaching our kids. And you guys have all the statistics there. Okay, so we've done the plug.
Okay,
everyone's really
what
excited.
is it, right?
So what the heck is
what
it?
What is this program?
So there's 4 levels of happiness.
Yes.
Can you please explain this?
Yeah, well, the program is divided into 10 principles of civilization. And by principles, we mean fundamental, basic guiding rules. Upon which you can build other guiding rules. But there are 10 fundamental principles that are necessary for civilization. And any culture that does not have all 10 of these principles is going to collapse. And ours is collapsing because we're losing all 10. So the first one is called the principle of beneficence, which comes from the Latin bene, which means the good. Right? And the principle teaches that the meaning or real happiness comes from using your life as a good for the other rather than using others as a good for yourself. So, in other words, it's better to sacrifice yourself for the good of another than to sacrifice another for the good of yourself. That's what brings real happiness. Well, how do you prove that? Because today in this culture, it's very opposite. And so Father Spitzer has developed a curriculum called the 4 Levels of Happiness, which is the basis of everything we teach. And if you don't start here, you're not going to get to the other 9 principles. People who don't believe this principle first will never buy into the other 9 principles because they directly come out of the belief that it's better to give your life as a service to others than to sacrifice them for your own needs. So how do you get there? Well, he talks about how every human being has 4 different desires. The desire for physical pleasure and material possessions. And we all need that to survive. But it's not enough. If that's all you're living for, you're going to end up either depressed or you're going to end up feeling like you're living beneath yourself or you're going to be, just a mess. And so you need more.
Sounds like something that's happening today in our society a little bit.
Right. Yeah. And so now you have, all these crises of people, the crisis of the soul, the opioid crisis, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, sex addiction, all these addictions. Where are they coming from? A lot of it is coming from this belief in our culture that materialism is going to make you happy, and it doesn't. And when people find out it doesn't, what do? They don't know where to go. So they end up obsessing compulsively on some kind of material addiction. And that's partly where some of that addiction, not all addictions come from there, but it does play a part and play a role. So what do? Well, happiness level 2 is a little deeper than level 1. It's ego high. It's a kind of happiness that you get when you are successful or powerful or independent or in control of your life, right? All these things we hear about from the opposition, right? This is where life is. You want power. You want to be in control. You want to get ahead. You want to be successful. You want to have a high quality of life. You want to have more than anybody else, right? You want to be independent. That's level 2. This sense that I have achieved, I've accomplished, I'm powerful. My ego is growing. And it's not a bad level of happiness. Like level 1, you need it, and it can be good, and it can be used for good. The problem is that our culture is emphasizing level 1 and 2 as if those were the most important things in life. That's where you get identity. That's where you gain meaning from. That's where you get happiness from. That's where you get your sense of self from. And when you do that in level 2, you're going to end up in a living hell. Because level 2, the ego high, when it's used as an end in itself instead of a means for a greater end, like using your talents and skills for the betterment of the culture, it ends up aggressive. It ends up contemptuous of others. It ends up bitter. It ends up jealous. angry, rageful, self-focused to the point of greed and selfishness. And it really ends up being a real relationship killer. So what we do is we teach in our curriculum, level 1 and 2 are not good enough for you. They're beneath you. You need level 3 and 4. And happiness level 3 is the gift of self beyond you for someone else. So it's love, compassion, yes, generosity, right? Giving your life to others for the good of the other, not for your own ego advancement or wealth advancement. And then, of course, the problem with level 3 is it's also not enough. Because human beings want perfect love and we want absolute justice, right? And we want perfect beauty and perfect goodness, and we can't get it out of this world. So we end up in crisis again, right? We end up despairing. And so level 4 is surrender to God. It requires faith, the belief that there is perfect, infinite, absolute truth and love and justice, but it's not me and it's not you, it's God. So what do? We teach all 4 levels, all 4 of these levels. We help people explore these levels. We help them see level 1 and 2 is not good enough. We help them identify the crises of levels 1 and 2. And then we help them to see what you really want and what's really worthy of you is level 3 and 4. And we have, like I said, we can move people from, less than 50% to almost 90, sometimes in some cases 90 to 92% kids moving into levels 3 and 4 and saying, that's worthy of me. That's what I want. That's what I want to live for. So that principle of beneficence is critical because once they choose level 3 and 4, doing a good beyond the self, then the question becomes, how do I live that way? Yeah. How do I do that? How do I get there? How do I keep it? Well, that's why you need the other 9 principles. So then we teach them, okay, now let's go through some principles to help you keep that identity, that level 3-4 identity.
What do you say? I don't know if you have it. I'm going to skip around here, but so what do you say? I'm just thinking of a recent conversation I had with a protester on a campus, and it was at a Catholic school. I think it was Villanova, and the girl, this was like a 10-minute Q&A exchange. She would say something, I would ask a question. I always try to ask more questions, right? Because I think a lot of times what they say is more powerful than what I'm going to say, because I think that has more, if I can clarify what they're saying and I can get them to actually admit what they're really saying to the rest of the audience, it makes my case for me, right?
That's right.
Because at the end of this exchange, the girl actually said that, I guess the fetus is my property. And I was like, well, okay, I'm done now, because you just, said something that we all universally here in this room acknowledge is a bad thing, because you just said another human being was your property. But before that, in the conversation, she got to a point where she said, I'm entitled to have as much sex as I want. Yes. And I said, well,
I've encountered this, yeah.
I said, okay. I said, well, what is sex for? And she said, well, it's, for relationship. It can be for procreation, and it's for pleasure. I was like, I don't know. Like, is that in the Bible? Like pleasure? Like, she's like, I can have as much pleasure as I want. And what you're trying to do in the pro-life movement by, telling me that, if I choose to have sex with someone, because my premise is kind of like, well, I'm not telling you not to have sex. I'm just saying if you choose to have sex with another person, and you're in a heterosexual relationship, you have to understand that a logical consequence of your decision might be creating another unique, whole living human being. And like when you enter into that agreement with someone to have sex with them, that you're kind of entering into that there could be this consequence. Yeah. And what they've done so well on the other side is saying there's no consequences to it, right? There's the birth control pill, there's abortion. And so it was really interesting because I've heard it a couple of times of, you're trying to limit my pleasure. And I'm entitled to as much pleasure as I want. First of all, that's assuming that all their sex is good and sex and very pleasurable sex, which which I brought up. Huffington Post even said people who are in a committed relationship and are faithful, going to church often, frequently, actually have the most pleasurable sex.
Yeah, that's what the studies show.
Yeah, it's because you're more intimate and have more communication. So what do you say to someone who's like, I'm entitled to have as much pleasure as I want? Like,
my answer to them would say, in a way, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't use the word entitled, but you're absolutely right. You can choose to turn sex into an object of pleasure. You can if you want to, and you can say that that's all I want. And if you do that, you can make that choice. It's not my desire to force you out of that opinion, but I would say, let's present some options. And you should have a right to choose what you think is truly worthy of you, because you are a free human being. So let me just present some options to you. there are basically two fundamental ways to view sex. You can view sexuality as something meant for the self, which is kind of what you're telling me right now, right? Playing the devil's advocate there. That sex is meant for my pleasure. It's meant for my possession. It's meant for my ego. It's meant for my good. It's meant for whatever I want it to be. And that is one way you can see it. If you see sex that way, you will end up, can you at least agree that you will end up occasionally, maybe at least hurting other people, right? Because you're going to break some hearts out there. You're going to sleep around a lot more than you probably should. And you may end up getting a disease and you may pass that around a little bit, and you may end up having a baby you don't want. And then that baby gets passed around maybe a bit and doesn't even know her mom, or maybe you have an abortion and you end somebody's life because of your sexual choices. So we at least agree that, if that's the view of sex you have, you are going to end up hurting other people in some way. I'm not saying whether that's a good or bad right now. I'm just saying, can we at least agree that you may break some hearts, right? And you may end up, that's one way of viewing sex. Another way of viewing sex, and I'm not saying you can't have broken hearts in this other way either, but just take a look at this. Another way of viewing sex is that sex is not meant primarily for me. Yes, it's pleasurable. That's part of it, right? Yes, it's about my relationship. That's part of it. Yes, it's about building up my sense of self-esteem, and who I am as a person, and it makes my personhood bigger. That's part of it. But it's not fundamentally meant for that. The primary purpose of sex is a gift of myself to the other. And every expression of sex ought to be so beautiful and so powerful and so real and so huge that it's always an expression of love to the other, not ever pointed only at myself. And all those other things, the pleasure and my ego getting a sense of self-esteem through that, those are all wonderful things, but they're byproducts. Now, what's my point here? You can fundamentally choose which view of sex you're going to have. You can. And I don't want to force you to choose one or the other, because I'm a person who believes in love, and love needs to be free. But I would challenge you on this. I think you are worthy of choosing a notion of sex that puts you at the service of others instead of others as a sacrifice for you. Because I think that if you really look deep down, you will acknowledge that the times in your life that you feel most happy, most fulfilled, most deeply meaningful are the times that you are giving yourself away for others for their good and not your own. So I'm not asking you to answer that question right now. You're in front of all your friends and your peers, and it's hard to do that. But when you're home at night in your bed and you're really thinking about what makes your life valuable, if the answer is gift of self, then maybe let that change your view of sex just for a little while. Try it for a month and see if that doesn't change your whole view of your own self-worth, your whole view of happiness, and your whole view of the meaning of life. Just give it a try. That's all I would say. Your whole point is to lead, to challenge, to invite, I'm not going to throw statistics at you about how many sexual diseases you're going to get, or how many transmitted diseases you're going to transmit, or how many the statistics on broken relationships, because that's not their problem. The problem with the person who's voicing that is not that they haven't heard the statistics or they don't know enough of those kinds of facts. The problem is that they are fundamentally broken in their heart. They're not following the call that they have to live their life for someone else. And we make a big mistake in the pro-life movement when we make this assumption that they're not like us. They're not like us. They're different. And we get scared of it. They are like us. They are made out of the same fabric. They are cut out of the same cloth. They're made in the image and likeness of God, just like we are. They just don't believe it, or they don't know it. And they won't know it unless we call them to that. So I never hesitate to say, yeah, you can make a choice. But here, let me show you what the two options are. Give yourself the right to hear what the other option is. Because what if you find that it's actually worthy of you? Why would you want to just close your mind to hearing the other options? It's a pretty attractive option.
That was really good.
I don't know. Okay, thanks.
I just need like a little Camille Pauley in my pocket.
No,
you don't. How do I write this down? Memorize.
You don't need that.
That's so good. No, that's perfect. Yeah. Because it's so sad, because they're so get to the point where you're so broken, where you're willing to stand up in front of a room full of people you don't know, and say, I'm entitled to have as much sex.
Yeah, I debated a girl. I debated an abortionist at the University of California at Berkeley. I think you told me heard the story.
I'm so glad.
A few years ago, yeah. And there were 700 kids in this class. And they all asked questions. It was a 3-hour debate. And afterwards, this one girl stands up at the mic and she says, your idea of happiness is cute, but I believe that happiness is having sex with whoever I want, whenever I want, wherever I want, however I want, regardless of who gets hurt. And the whole crowd cheers, everybody cheering. And I let it die down. And when it died down, I just said, well, if that's really what makes you happy, if that's really is making you happy, well then, there you go. But I said, if though, at the end of the day, you go home and you realize that what you said is really beneath you, and that what you are really deserving of is someone who loves you so much that they would only want to give themselves to you and want you to give only yourself back to them in an act of real love, not selfishness, then I would challenge you to change your mind. I can't force you to, but think about what you just said tonight, that you're just an object of pleasure. Really? Is that what you are? Is that what the women's movement has come so far for?
That's what the women's movement has said.
Is that what it is? Yeah. And that's all you can do. I can't force her. I can't give her a statistic that's going to change her mind, but I can work in her heart.
That's perfect. Thank you. All right. So that's like the very
that's the beginning.
First principle.
That's the first principle.
We have 9 other principles.
But it's the most important.
It is. I mean, that's everything right there.
Your life is a gift for others.
What are some of the other principles? I don't know if you want to go through all 9
we can just do a short one of it. But there's
one I use a lot, so I'm waiting for you.
Well, there's basically 3 different chunks now. Okay. You've got 3 principles of logic that come out of the principle of beneficence, because now logic matters to people. Being rational and reasonable matters. Why would you care about being logical if you're level 1 and 2? It's all about me. I can make up my own logic, right? And then level 3 and 4, and they do. Level 3 and 4, you want to be logical because the truth matters. I want to know what the truth is so that I know who not to hurt. Are you a human being or aren't you? Because if you are, I don't want to hurt you because it matters to me. So there's 3 principles of logic, and then 3 principles of ethics, and then 3 principles of justice. Principles of logic help establish that the unborn child at the moment of fertilization is a full human person. And it starts with the principle of non-contradiction. You cannot have a contradiction to be logical, right?
I like that one. Because this is what I hear all the time. Yeah, it's a baby if you want it.
And it's not if you don't.
It's a blob of tissue if you don't. And it's like you can't be and not be at the same exact time. It doesn't make sense.
The only thing you can say to that is basically what you've just done is you have completely violated the principle of the most basic principle of logic, non-contradiction, that something cannot be and not be at the same time, at the same place, in the same substance, in the same respect. I said, can you hold contradictions if you want to? Yeah, you can. And you just did. And you can do that if you want. But everything you say, the opposite will be true at the same time. Without logic grounding how we make decisions, how we make laws, you can't even have laws. Because whatever law you proclaim, the opposite of that law is also true at the same time. I can contradict any law you want. Who are you to put me in prison, because, I raped somebody or I stole something that belonged to you, right? Because we live by contradictions. If you want to live in a world that is logical, where we discover what is truth and we live by it, then you can't hold contradictions. It's either a baby or not. It's either a human being or it's not. It can't be both at the same time. So if we can't agree on that, then we can't even have a conversation. The idea of debate is ridiculous. Once you move past that point, then you say, okay, is it a human person or not? Well, then you need the principle, what we call the principle of objective evidence, right? That the best theory or definition is one based on objective evidence, not subjective feelings or whims, right? But who has the best evidence? And all the best evidence is showing that the unborn child is a human being from the moment of fertilization. You can Google it. You can Google it. You could look at any medical textbook, right? And it's all acknowledging that at the moment of sperm egg fusion, you have a full, complete entity that on its own is orienting its own development towards a human-like development. So you have biologically speaking, you have a full being of human origin at the moment of fertilization, biological conception. Dr. Jerome Lejeune, the famous French geneticist, proved this back in the 1970s using his DNA sequencer, that the full human genetic code is present in an unborn child at the moment of fertilization. So you have a unique, individual, independent, full human being. So then they turn to the next question. Okay, it may be a human being, but it's not a human person.
It's not a person.
It's not a person. What does that mean? Okay. Personhood designates the moral worth and the legal protectability of a being. So when you are a person, you have legal protection and you have a moral worth, right? A value to yourself. So that what they're saying is it's a being, biologically, it's a being of human origin, but it doesn't have any moral worth. And so we ask them, well, wait a minute. You're just saying that, but you have to have a reason, right? What is it that suddenly magically gives you moral worth and legal protectability? Oh, birth, they'll say.
Or conscience.
Conscience. And I'll say, well, wait a minute. Why consciousness? Why consciousness? How about a certain degree of consciousness? Who are you to say it's just consciousness? That's a little bit, lower thinking of you. I think you ought to have a certain degree of consciousness. I think you ought to have a certain IQ. And whose definition of enough IQ is too much IQ?
Seems like a slippery slope.
Right. And why IQ? How about athletic ability?
Yep.
Who are you to say it has to be an IQ? What about people who don't have an IQ and think you ought to be able to throw a basketball through a hoop or something?
How about people who are tall enough not to sound like cushion to do a podcast?
What about eyesight? Right. So that question then becomes, it's completely arbitrary. You will always find a demarcation that is completely subjective or arbitrary on the pro-abortion movement side when they claim it's not a human person. And then they will say, well, then what's your demarcation? And I'll say, any being of human origin is a human person. Why? Because every being of human origin has the capacity to achieve love and relationship with God. And that's what gives you moral worth and legal protection. Anything else is subjective and arbitrary. The fact that you are capable of something as infinitely valuable as love, compassion, empathy, goodness, gift of self, and faith in an unconditionally loving God is what makes you unconditionally valuable. Right? You can't match that with IQ. You can't match that with height, or material wealth. And so, anyway, it's a way to challenge.
What principle is that?
That's called the principle of complete explanation.
Okay.
That what makes you a person, if you're going to define something, use the complete explanation of what it is. Don't focus on, its biological parts or what it physically can do. You have to define something well, you have to look at the fullness of what that thing is. And the fullness of a human being is not just what we look like and what we can physically functionally do. You have to include the transmaterial data, right? The non-physical data of human persons, that we are capable of love. We are capable of transcendent being. We are capable of faith in the transcendent. And those things are what give us immeasurable value and worth and therefore legal protection.
Okay.
All right. So now you kind of help to establish what is a human person. So then the question becomes, all right, but I can do whatever I want.
Yeah. So
and that's
this
where
is like the
next.
natural argument, by the way, on college campus. It's nothing. It's a bottle of tissue.
Well, first it's all about me. So then we move them to level 3 and 4.
Yeah.
And then, but it's not a person anyway.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Then we show it is.
Well,
So
now it's human.
It's not a human.
Now it's not a person. Then it's like, it doesn't matter.
And then it
my
doesn't
body.
matter because I have the right to do whatever I want, right? I can choose to do whatever I want.
Argument with you. Okay.
So now what we say is wait, okay. But yes, I want you to have as much freedom to do with your body whatever you want, and hopefully you'll use it for the good. But yeah, we want you to be free. Nobody wants to take away your freedom. But remember that first principle. Don't violate that, please. It's so important to your own dignity that you are made for the good and doing a good beyond yourself. If that's true, there are certain ethical principles that you really don't want to violate because it will hurt you. Right? It's beneath your dignity, and it will have massive ramifications on a cultural and societal scale. And the most basic one is called the principle of non-maleficence, right? Again, from Latin, male, meaning harm. Do no harm. Do no evil, right? And obviously, the gravest evil you could do is to deliberately kill another being who is made in the image and likeness of God, who wants him to be a participant in love in the world. Right? And so just by the very first principle of ethics, do no harm, we are already violating our purpose, our meaning, our happiness, right? With abortion. But beyond that, there's a second ethical principle. It's called the principle of ends versus means. And this one, a lot of your audience has heard, right? The ends don't justify the means. And what does that mean? You cannot use an evil method to get to a good end. So I cannot say, we want to feed a whole bunch of hungry people. And so in order to do that, we'll take out a life insurance policy on Kristan. And then we just have to bump her off. And then we could get $1 million. And then we could feed all these hungry people. And all we had to do was
look at all this
bump
good.
Off Kristan, right? Look at all the good we could do. Look at all the, right? You can't do that. Why? You cannot do that under the principle of beneficence, which leads to the principle of ends versus means, because the goodness you're trying to achieve is undermined by the evil method, right? So you're trying to do something good for your mother. You want to buy her a new purse for her birthday, so you steal $50, okay? To show her your love, right, for her, you have unloved her. You have broken the relationship. You've lied to her. You've stolen to her. From her, right? And so it undermines the good you're trying to do. So you never want to use an evil means to get a good end. Okay. And then there's this third principle of ethics, which is called the principle of the intrinsic dignity of the person, and it recognizes that every human being has value and worth in and of himself or herself, not because of what you can do, not because of how smart you are, But because you are being made in the image and likeness of love itself, you have worth unto yourself. And those 3 principles of ethics right away tell you there's something wrong with abortion. Violation of the principle of non-maleficence. Violation of ends, don't justify the means. Because what we're saying is I can justify the evil of killing somebody because of this good it gets me.
Because it
freedom
lets
of
me
women or
get my law degree.
Whatever.
I can finish my school.
Right. Or I won't have a broken relationship. Or I don't have to tell my parents or whatever. And then this principle of the dignity of the person. When I was debating this abortion doctor, he told us in the debate that he stops doing abortions when the unborn baby, when the brainwave, not the brainwaves, but what did he phrase it? That the time that he stops doing abortions is when the brain is fully developed. Mm-hmm. And so when the nervous system is fully developed.
Then? Because from
and I asked the kids, when is your nervous system fully developed, right? And they were saying 3 months old, 5 months old. I was like, no. It's not until you're about 22 years old. Mm-hmm. So basically every student in the class, was not fully human, but the doctor that I was debating and I said, whose side do you really want to be on here? But that's not what gives you value and worth. What gives you value and worth is that you are made, you have the capacity in your future to participate in love and goodness. Mm-hmm. And anything else you do is, again, going to be very subjective and very arbitrary. And then, of course, what happens now is they say, but what about my rights? My rights. So you've moved from my happiness to human being to human personhood to right and wrong to, but what about my rights, my freedom? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, they want to say, but I want to protect my rights. And shouldn't we just give people the right to decide for themselves? Because you'll never get everybody to agree with this, or it's going to take a long time. So in the end, shouldn't we just let people decide for themselves and at least not have a law? So now you have to address the justice issue. In justice, there has to be a law. And here's why. Because where do you get your rights from? Right? Where do you get them from? From human dignity. The only reason why you have a right, Kristan, to life is because of your invaluable human dignity, right? Because of your worth. And that's what grounds your right. We call this your right to life. Mm-hmm. Right? I owe you a duty not to kill you because you are immeasurably valuable. Right?
Thank you.
You're welcome. To the pro-life movement, as well as to the entire world, as well as to the entire Christian kingdom, right? So we owe you that right to life. You also have what's known as a right to liberty. Where does that come from? Your right to liberty comes because of your capacity to love. Love is defined as freely choosing the good of the other above the good of the self. So you need freedom to make that choice. So you have a right to liberty. I owe you a duty not to infringe on your liberty so that you can live out the life of love that you were meant for. And then you have what's called the right to property, which sometimes is known as the right to pursue happiness. Mm-hmm. And the right to property is necessary because you need to eat and drink and have things, and a shelter and all that. So here's the key. These are fundamental human rights. I didn't give them to you. The government didn't give them to you. They weren't voted into existence. Those rights exist naturally because of who you are, because of your immeasurable value. And so those rights are owed to anyone who has the same worth that you have. Right?
Because we're all equal.
Because we're all equal. And so if the unborn baby is a full human person and therefore has immeasurable value and worth just like you are, because he's capable in his future of love and relationship with God, then we also owe him a duty not to kill him, not to infringe on his liberty, and to protect his property. By the way, a lot of states have property protection rights for fetuses. So you can actually leave property to your unborn child, but not the protection of the life right, which is kind of a contradiction to a lot of it. So anyway, so you've got these life rights, but then they're smart enough to say, oh, but what about my liberty right? Right? What about the woman's liberty right? That's inviolable. It's an inalienable right. So they'll say, Camille, you just said the child has a life right, but what about the inalienable liberty right? And that's where you need the second principle, not just the inalienable or the natural rights principle, but the principle of the hierarchy of rights.
This is the one
you really like. Yeah. Everybody really likes this one, right? Mm-hmm. And what we show them is, look.
Because this is what abortion did. Abortion it fundamentally pitted, Roe versus Wade pitted mother against child. Like for the first time in human history, it was like, oh, we're going to pit these two in a battle against each other.
Yeah, and the two don't need to be in battle because they're actually complementary.
Exactly.
But here's what you say. They work together and you say this, okay, how do I know what to do when there is a conflict of rights? Well, you can do one of two things. You can arbitrarily choose the winner based on who's smarter, who's faster, who's more apparent, who's wealthier, who has more political power, who's born versus who's unborn. Always going to be an arbitrary subjective rationale, which is going to get you in trouble and be unethical in the end. Or you can look for an objective cue, right? These rights naturally order themselves. Ask yourself this question. Which right is necessary for the very possibility of the other right's existence? Life is a necessary condition for liberty. Right? If I'm dead, my freedom is a moot point. Right? Okay? You need life in order for liberty to exist. And in the same way, you need liberty for your property rights to make any sense. If you own me, by default, you own all my property. Okay? So these rights order themselves by nature. I didn't dictate it. We didn't vote on it. They just naturally order themselves, which means that when you have the right to life versus the right to liberty, life has to take priority, because without it, your liberty interests are a moot point. They rely on the life right to exist. And ultimately, in the end, it goes back to the beginning. By giving up my liberty right for the life right of another human being, I am living out the principle of beneficence.
That's right. It's like this.
It's a beautiful circle. It's like this beautiful package. So what we're trying to do at Healing the Culture is entice people towards something more beautiful. Right? It's a very positive, deep, beautiful, and meaningful philosophy that you're trying to take the place of what Planned Parenthood has given to people. It's a very vapid and empty philosophy of life.
What do you say? So you have these on your respectlife.university website. You have these videos, and you use these kind of 10 principles in these videos. But you have some really good ones. You have one on abortion facts. Can you lay out the different arguments on that?
Yeah. So one of the arguments that people give, well, for example, I don't know if you remember the burning fertility clinic.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that one? Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the one where it was some dude on Twitter, some like Hollywood
He was a comedian.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, it makes it even better. He said, I have this argument that's going to stump all pro-lifers.
Right. And of course, it was an argument that's been around for 20 years. But anyway.
Yeah. And so it was like, essentially, there's like one toddler and there's like a burning IVF clinic full of embryos. Right. Who would you, as a pro-lifer, choose to save? And if the pro-lifer says the toddler, then that somehow...
Then you're a hypocrite because you don't really believe
these 5,000 embryos...
unborn children are human beings.
Yeah.
But if you choose the unborn human beings, then you're a monster because you're going to let the toddler burn to death in pain and agony.
So there's really not an answer.
So he's trying to force you into a dilemma. Now, you can't say, because it's a dilemma, he's trying to make a point, you can't say, well, I would carry the embryos and tell the toddler to walk. You know, his point is to try to get you to choose, and it's a valid thing to do in a philosophical exercise. You have to choose one or the other. So what's the answer? The answer is, I would probably choose the 5-year-old toddler to save if I could only choose one or the other. Why? Not because ontologically, right, in essence, I believe that the toddler has more value than the 1,000 embryos in the tubes. I believe they have equal value. And I believe they have equal value, not quantitatively. You can't say she has equal value to one of the embryos. She has equal value to all of the embryos because you can't measure human value quantitatively, right? So, for example, if you say Kristan is on this side of the room and 50 of our viewers are on that side of the room, you cannot say there's more value quantitatively on this side of the room than there. It's equal because you both have immeasurable value, and infinity is equal to infinity. Okay. So what's the point? The point is, I cannot say that I would choose the embryos because they have more value because there's more of them, right? Which is what he wants to try to get you to do. Instead of doing it quantitatively, I would have to do it on some qualitative basis. The 5-year-old is going to experience excruciating pain. She's going to scream. She's going to cry. She's going to be aware, right? And so I may save her for a number of different reasons rather than the embryos. Or I may choose to save the embryos because perhaps it is easier to carry the embryos than to get the child who's screaming and kicking, whatever. You could choose any variety of ways to resolve this, but what you're not going to do is resolve it on there are more embryos. And he's trying to say there's 1,000 of them. If you really believe those thousands were people, you would choose them because there's more of them. Yeah. And you could never resolve that quantitatively.
And Josh Braun at Equal Rights Institute, I read a blog they did after this burning.
Yeah.
And one of their points they had made in the blog of how does pro-lifers respond to this argument was it also depends on the relationship too.
Yes.
Because if you're that toddler's parent,
right.
you're gonna it doesn't matter how many other people are in the room, whether they're embryos in tubes or if they're living adults, if it's your toddler.
Yeah.
But they said if it's your embryo, if it's your child, child in that
then
too.
you may choose
because
of the relationship.
Yeah.
You can think of this example if the public school building is burning and you run in there, you would be justified in saving your child.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that you don't think that those 50 other children have equal value. Of course you do, but your relationship merits that it requires, in fact, that you have more of a responsibility towards your own child first, right? To protect your own child first, and then to protect as many other as you can possibly save.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
That's a very good argument, yeah.
Are there any other really good videos, that arguments you can go through that can teach us?
Oh, yeah.
All your wise. I don't have my notepad, but we're doing she's lecturing me tomorrow, so I'll have my notes up.
Well, lecture teaching, I could never lecture you.
I did an episode of Josh Braun recently, and I was like, the whole time I was like, I'm not being rude, I'm just taking notes during our podcast.
Well, there's always the good one about quality of life. There's always the quality of life argument that how can you force some child to be born into the world who's going to be suffering a terrible terminal illness or disabilities, and so isn't it better to have an abortion in that case? And my question is always, what do you mean by quality of life? Yeah. Because wait a minute, you're saying this child is going to have a low quality of life by whose measure? Do you mean he's going to suffer physically and maybe not enjoy physical, biological pleasure as much as other people? Because that may be true, but I would argue that's not real quality of life.
That's not real happiness.
That's not real happiness either. Yeah. Where does quality of life come from? Is it really from just physical being free of pain? Or can you experience super high quality of life while still being in pain because you know faith? Because you have family, because you have friends, George Bailey, right? Yeah. No man's a failure as friends or whatever. You really have to think about that because it becomes an argument against euthanasia as well.
Yeah, it's the same argument they use with abortion is it's always subjective, right? So it's not a fetus. Yeah. We'll say it's a fetus, but not a human. And it kind of depends on this subjective view of how it's consciousness or nervous system development but also you're reading the same thing of what is quality of life? Yeah. Well, quality of life for me is this, but for you, it may be something different.
And so what we're trying to do, and what I think is such a huge important part of the pro-life movement is, instead of always trying to challenge the statistics and challenge the facts, challenge the presumptions people are making. Challenge the assumptions the philosophical assumptions they're making, that you are automatically going to have a low quality of life if you are born into the world with a disability. Because I'll tell you what, I know several people with Down syndrome, and I would argue that their quality of life is far higher than most people's quality of life because these kids know love. They know unconditional love. They know. Have you ever been to a Special Olympics game?
I was a Special Olympics coach for 2 years.
Oh, yeah. So these kids know love and they know compassion. They'll stop the race to help another kid get up off the ground who fell so that they can all cross the finish line together. And when we watch the videos, all of us stuck on level 1 and 2 cry, because it pulls something out of us that we know is more worthy of us. So never let them get away with that argument. Wait. What do you mean by quality of life? Are you telling me that you really believe that your quality of life comes from your material possessions and the moments in your life that you're free of pain? Do you really believe that? Because I don't think that's true. And I think you're worth much more than that. And I think your quality comes because you can love. And I think you know that. And if it's true for you, why are you discounting it as true for that unborn baby? Why would you do that? And then you let them answer.
That's perfect. All right. Well, we have to wrap up this episode of Explicitly Pro-Life. I hope you were able to take notes during this. If not, you're just going to have to listen to it again. You're going to have to go to Healing Culture's website, respectlife.university, principlesandchoices.com,
and healingtheculture.com.
And healingtheculture.com. And you're going to have to watch all of the videos, get the curriculum for your kids and your grandkids, and start brushing up because I need to as well. But thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on Explicitly Pro-Life. And make sure you tell everyone you know to subscribe. Bye, guys.